Peter, tell us about your earliest memories of Sir Stanley Matthews.
Well, they would be very young. It would be after the war. So I'd be, some sort of 8, something like that, 8 or 9, that sort of age. But I used to be taken occasionally to Stoke City with my brothers. I'm from a large family, and I had a gap between the next brother, because I had quite a lot of sisters, and my elder brothers used to take me to Stoke. I always remember it was Town End, which was a bank, a tip, and they'd find a good place so that I could see the game, and that would be my the very early memories of that Stoke City team after the war, when the great man played.
Can you remember the anguish when he left for Blackpool? Did you get a feel of that at that age?
Well, I'd be pretty young, but I know there was a lot of concern about it, and because we talked a lot of football at home, as they did in places like Golden Hill. Football, even then, was a big topic of conversation, and there were people weren't happy that he was leaving.
And at Blackpool, he enjoyed great success, and I guess the pinnacle was the '53 final, the Matthews final. Did you catch any of that on television?
I actually saw it on television. We hadn't got a television, but we went to a relative's named Doyle's in Golden Hill, and the back streets. I can remember. I could take you to the house now if it's still there. I'm not sure. I think some of them still survive, but it's changed such a lot. And it was a pretty crowded living room when we all saw what a dramatic final it was. It's gone down as one of the great post-war finals.
Did people still around here still feel a pride in what he was achieving at Blackpool? He was still considered a son of the Potteries.
Well, he was. We know he's our most famous football son, and there's always been great interest in him. And because there have been very few names, if any, more iconic than Stanley Matthews in terms of English football. He's up there with just a few.
And of course, eventually he does come back to Stoke City in the early '60s. Tell us about the joy and the impact that had on the area.
Well, that had an amazing impact, because the crowd went up. You probably can find the figures. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they were dramatic. The change that had taken place and the feel-good factor around the city that he was coming back, and so yes, it was. It created a huge anticipation and a really good feeling.
What was it like to watch? I know he was getting on a bit. What was it like to watch him live?
Well, he was an amazing player, and he would have been an amazing player today. I take the view that you can only be the best in your own time, and I've had that view a very long time. But I'm equally certain that, remember, he was a very fine athlete. He was a man before his time. He was into diet, and he didn't drink. He was into all sorts of stretching and things that are now commonplace. So he was a very intelligent guy who wanted to look after himself and wanted to play for a long time. He achieved that, but he was clearly a man who thought a lot about the game and a lot about fitness and the best way to extend his career.
It seems unthinkable now that a man of 50 was still playing professional football. Was it mind-boggling even then?
Well, it is a record, and I can tell you a little story which he told me, and he told me with a straight face, but I was never quite sure, but I think he was very serious when he told me. He said, I was chatting with him in the boardroom, because he was the president of the club, and I used to see him a bit, and I'd taken him out for dinner, and so I got to know him very well, and we became good friends. And he did say, and he said, one of the mistakes I made, I retired too early. I'd got 2 more years in me. Whether Tony Waddington agreed with that, I shall never know, because I never asked him. But it was they were very much from his lips, and I remember smiling when he told me the story.
Retired too early at 50.
He said, yes.
What were his gifts as a player? Summing him up, what were his great gifts as a footballer?
Well, he had wonderful. He had pace. You know, he was as a boy. He was his record for the 100 yards was very impressive. He was a fine athlete and a fine sprinter, and so he got pace. But he got this surge of pace, you know, this quick 10 yards when he could just go. He just left you, and sometimes they were on the back because he dazzled them with his bit of skill. But he got wonderful balance. You know, you look at good play, he got that wonderful balance. And you'll see old shots of him, and you can see that just looking at old pictures. And you've seen him in certain poses and postures where you see that great balance he had, and wonderful dribbling skills. Dribbling was much more common then, and he wasn't called the Wizard of the Dribble for nothing. So. He got a wonderful striker of the ball. His corners are much talked about. I don't believe the stories about the lace being the right put in the right position for Freddie Steele to head the ball, but it's a good story.
How would he have got on in today's game? Lighter boots, lighter footballs, better pitches. How would he have fared in today's game?
Well, I have a view. You can only be the best in your own time, as I've said, and Stanley was that. And I think he would have adjusted. It probably would have suited him absolutely perfectly because he got all the skills, got wonderful touch, got everything you need to be a modern day footballer. So yes, he would have been very much at home. These wonderful pitches, a lighter ball, wasn't the greatest header of a ball, so he might have headed the modern ball.
A great footballer, as we've said, but also you got to know him in his later years, being on the board. What about as a person? How would you sum him up?
Well, he was very modest. He was a very modest man, given that his position in football, as certainly no one's had a more prominent position in football than Stanley did in his day. You've got to remember, things were different. But he was what I call the first truly international player, i.e. what I'm saying is that he was the first footballer to be recognised all over the world, I think. I don't know who predates him. I don't think anybody does, and that's quite something. And the attendance would go up simply because Stanley Matthews was playing. No telly, remember? You didn't see him on the television, so they got to go and see him in the flesh. And in London, crowds would go up. Europe, South America, got to go and see this special player. So it gives you some idea of just how significant he was in the game.
A global star. Obviously.
A global. I think he was I call it the first truly international player. What I mean is what you've just said, the first global name in football. Mm.
And finally, Peter, what do you think his legacy is to the football club, to football, and to the city of Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, he is, without question, our most famous footballing son, and it'll take some changing. It'd be nice to think somebody could come and perhaps measure against such an icon, but there's no doubt he stands there as our most famous ever footballer, and it's a great legacy. And it's also, even now, I've been away and been in football tournaments with, say, England, and where are you from? Stoke City. Even in modern times, people will say, Stanley Matthews. That tells you something, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Mm. And a privilege, I'm guessing, to have known him.
Oh, it was, and I got on very well with him. I liked his company. He'd got a charming wife, and I used to enjoy sometimes having dinner with them. He was a very careful eater and a very modest eater. He was a bit like, I always used to say, he was a bit like Peter Pan. He never wanted to grow old. None of us do, but Stanley in particular kept that youthful movement. I used to think even in his old age, you almost think he might have gone out and played.